The acrid smell of motor oil and the rhythmic clanking of tools filled the air of Jamal's small auto shop in Chicago. His skilled hands moved with practiced precision over the engine of a classic Mustang, a stark contrast to the shiny new luxury cars that increasingly dotted the streets outside. Jamal paused, wiping sweat from his brow with a grease-stained rag, and gazed out the open garage door. And if you love your family and want to hear more incredible stories like this one, subscribe to our channel. The neighborhood was changing, and not necessarily for the better, at least not for folks like him. Where once stood family-owned businesses and modest homes, now sleek coffee shops and overpriced condos seemed to sprout overnight. Jamal's loyal customers, many of whom he'd known since childhood, were being priced out one by one. "Another for sale sign," Jamal muttered, spotting a realtor hammering a placard into the lawn across the street. He shook his head, a knot of worry tightening in his stomach. How long before some developer came knocking on his door, waving a check and empty promises? Jamal's reverie was interrupted by the roar of a high-performance engine. A gleaming red sports car zipped past, seeming almost comically out of place on the pothole-ridden street. Behind the wheel sat Madison Carrington, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the steering wheel as she argued with the disembodied voice coming through her car's speakers. "Mother, I understand the importance of the gala, but I can't just drop everything to attend another mindless social event," Madison said, exasperation evident in her voice. She navigated around a delivery truck, her speed hardly diminishing. "This isn't just any event, Madison," her mother's crisp voice retorted. "The Carrington Foundation's annual fundraiser is our chance to showcase our commitment to the community. Your absence would be noted, and not favorably." Madison rolled her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. "And what community are we actually helping? The country club set? I want to make a real difference, not just write checks and pose for photos." "Don't be naive, dear," her mother chided. "These connections are vital. One day, when you take over the foundation—" "If I take it over," Madison interjected, her frustration mounting. She pressed harder on the accelerator, the engine's growl matching her rising anger. Back in the garage, Jamal had returned his focus to the Mustang's engine, losing himself in the familiar task. The screech of tires jerked his attention back to the street. Time seemed to slow as he watched the red sports car careen out of control, heading straight for a group of pedestrians on the sidewalk. Without hesitation, Jamal sprinted from the garage. His heart pounded as he raced towards the impending disaster. The car's tires squealed as Madison desperately tried to regain control. In a split-second decision, Jamal lunged forward, reaching through the open driver's side window. His strong hands gripped the steering wheel, wrenching it to the side. The sports car swerved, narrowly missing the terrified pedestrians. Instead, it clipped a parking meter, sending it spinning. Jamal was thrown to the ground, his head connecting with the unyielding pavement. As darkness crept into the edges of his vision, he saw a blur of red hair and heard a frantic voice calling out, "Oh my God, are you okay? Someone call an ambulance." Then everything went black. The bell above the garage door chimed, pulling Jamal's attention away from the invoice he was struggling to decipher. His left arm, now in a sling, made even simple tasks a challenge. He looked up, surprise registering on his face as he recognized the woman standing awkwardly in the doorway. Madison Carrington looked decidedly out of place in the gritty auto shop, her designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair a stark contrast to the grease-stained surroundings. In her hands, she clutched a bouquet of flowers and what appeared to be an envelope. "Hi," she said, her voice soft and uncertain. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to thank you properly for what you did." Jamal straightened up, wincing slightly at the movement. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." Madison shook her head, stepping further into the shop. "But they didn't. You did. And you got hurt because of it. She thrust the flowers towards him, a hint of desperation in her eyes. "Please let me at least give you these, and—" She hesitated, then held out the envelope. "I'd like to invite you to an event." Jamal accepted the flowers with his good arm, eyeing the envelope warily. "Look, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not really the charity case type." "It's not charity," Madison insisted. It's a fundraiser for community empowerment programs right here in this neighborhood." Jamal's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Community empowerment? In this neighborhood? No offense, but what would you know about that?" Madison flinched at his words but stood her ground. "More than you might think. This event, it's not just some stuffy gala. It's a chance to bring attention and resources to the real issues facing this community. Issues like gentrification, small business support, job training." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "I thought, well, I hoped you might want to be a part of that." Jamal studied her face, searching for any sign of insincerity. To his surprise, he found none. Still, the idea of attending some high society event made his skin crawl. "I don't know. That's not really my scene." "Please," Madison said, her voice softening. "Your perspective, your experiences, they're exactly what people need to hear. You saved lives that day, mine included. Maybe you can help save this neighborhood too." Jamal sighed, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. Against his better judgment, he found himself nodding. "All right, I'll think about it." A bright smile broke across Madison's face. "That's all I ask. The details are in the envelope. And Jamal?" She paused at the door. "Thank you for everything." As the bell chimed again with her departure, Jamal stared at the envelope in his hand. What had he just gotten himself into? Later that evening, Jamal sat at his kitchen table, the invitation spread out before him. His friends, Marcus and Deshawn, lounged nearby, expressions of disbelief on their faces. "Man, you're actually considering this?" Marcus asked, shaking his head. "A bunch of rich folks patting themselves on the back while sipping champagne? That ain't you, Jay." Jamal fingered the embossed lettering on the invitation. "It's not just that. She said it's about community empowerment. Maybe it's a chance to make some real change." Deshawn snorted. "Yeah, right. And I'm gonna win the lottery tomorrow. Wake up, man. People like that, they don't care about us. They just want to feel good about themselves." "I don't know," Jamal mused. She seemed different, like she really wanted to understand. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "Even if she does, you really think you're going to fit in there, with all those suits and ties? No offense, but you ain't exactly country club material." Jamal felt a flicker of anger at his friend's words, but he couldn't deny the truth in them. The thought of navigating a world so far removed from his own filled him with anxiety. But then he remembered the determination in Madison's eyes, the sincerity in her voice. "Maybe that's exactly why I should go," he said slowly, "to show them what this community is really about, who we really are." Deshawn and Marcus exchanged skeptical glances, but Jamal's mind was made up. He reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the number Madison had left. Whatever came next, he knew his life was about to change. The question was, would it be for better or for worse? The opulent ballroom of the Carrington Foundation headquarters was a far cry from the familiar confines of Jamal's auto shop. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the gathering of Chicago's elite, their polite laughter and the clink of champagne glasses creating a constant, low hum. Jamal tugged uncomfortably at the collar of his rented tuxedo, feeling every bit the outsider he was. "Jamal, you made it!" Madison's voice cut through his discomfort. She appeared at his side, resplendent in an emerald green gown that complemented her fiery hair. "I was worried you might change your mind." Jamal managed a small smile. "I considered it. Still not sure I belong here. Madison's face softened. Of course you do. Come on, there are some people I want you to meet. Before Jamal could protest, Madison was guiding him through the crowd. She introduced him to a dizzying array of people: business leaders, politicians, philanthropists. To his surprise, many seemed genuinely interested in hearing about his experiences in the neighborhood. So, Mr. Williams, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, said, Madison tells me you run an auto repair shop. In this age of planned obsolescence, that must be quite the challenge. Jamal nodded, warming to the topic. It can be, especially when it comes to sourcing parts for older models. Sometimes I think these companies make it difficult on purpose to push people into buying new. The man, who Jamal now recognized as the CEO of a major automotive supplier, leaned in, intrigued. That's an interesting perspective. Have you considered developing your own line of replacement parts? Jamal blinked, caught off guard. Well, I've thought about it. But the startup costs, the regulations. Perhaps we should discuss this further, the CEO said, handing Jamal a business card. I'd be interested in hearing more about your ideas. As the evening progressed, Jamal found himself relaxing slightly. He and Madison gravitated towards each other between conversations, sharing observations and, to his surprise, laughing together. During a quiet moment, Madison led him out onto a terrace overlooking the city. So, she said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. What do you think? Not quite as terrible as you imagined? Jamal chuckled. I'll admit, it's not what I expected. These people, they seem to actually care. Madison nodded, her expression turning serious. Many of them do. The spell was broken by the sound of someone clearing their throat behind them. Madison, darling, a crisp voice said, your speech is about to begin. They turned to see an elegant woman in her 50s, her resemblance to Madison unmistakable. Mrs. Carrington's eyes flicked between her daughter and Jamal, a slight frown creasing her brow. Of course, Mother, Madison said, straightening her posture. She gave Jamal an apologetic smile. Duty calls. Will you watch from the sidelines? Jamal nodded, following them back into the ballroom. As Madison took the stage, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. She spoke passionately about the need for inclusive development, for programs that would lift up entire communities rather than displacing them. But halfway through her speech, Mrs. Carrington stepped onto the stage, whispering urgently in Madison's ear. Madison's face fell, and she stammered through the rest of her presentation. Her earlier confidence shattered. As applause filled the room, Jamal saw Madison's mother grip her arm, leading her away from the crowd. Their hushed argument carried across the suddenly silent ballroom. What were you thinking? Mrs. Carrington hissed. Advocating for those people? And cavorting with him? She jerked her head towards Jamal. He's not the sort of person you should be associating with, Madison. Think of your reputation, of the family's image. Madison wrenched her arm free. Those people are part of our city, Mother, and Jamal is twice the person most of the people in this room will ever be. But as their eyes met across the room, Jamal saw the conflict in Madison's face. And he realized that, despite their connection, their worlds might be too far apart to ever truly bridge. The weight of Mrs. Carrington's words hung heavy in the air, a palpable barrier between Jamal and the glittering world he had briefly been allowed to glimpse. He watched as Madison's face crumpled, torn between defending him and placating her mother. In that moment, Jamal made a decision. Without a word, he turned and strode towards the exit, his rented shoes echoing on the marble floor. He could hear Madison calling his name, but he didn't look back. This wasn't his world, and he had been foolish to think, even for a moment, that it could be. Outside, the cool night air hit him like a slap, grounding him back in reality. He loosened his bow tie, feeling as though he could finally breathe again. The valet gave him a curious look as he waved off the offer to retrieve his car, an old beater that would look comically out of place among the luxury vehicles lining the driveway. "Jamal, wait!" Madison's voice cut through the night. She had followed him out, her heels clicking rapidly on the pavement. "Please, don't go. What my mother said, it doesn't reflect how I feel." Jamal turned to face her, his expression a mixture of hurt and resignation. "Doesn't it, though? Maybe not consciously, but deep down. Madison, look at me. Really look. I don't belong here, in your world. And you trying to force it, it's only going to cause problems for you." Madison reached for his hand, but Jamal stepped back. "That's not true," she insisted, her voice cracking. "You do belong. Your voice, your perspective, it's exactly what these people need to hear." "And what about what you need?" Jamal asked softly. "Your family, your position in society. I saw your face in there. You're torn, and I get it. But I won't be the reason you throw all that away." Tears welled in Madison's eyes. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away?" Jamal sighed, running a hand over his face. "It's for the best. You've got important work to do here, Madison. Don't let whatever this is between us derail that. Your mother's right about one thing. Associating with me will only complicate things for you." He turned to leave, but Madison's voice stopped him once more. "And what about what I want? Don't I get a say in this?" Jamal looked back at her, standing there in her beautiful gown, the city lights reflecting off her tears. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a different world, one where the gulf between them wasn't so vast. But reality crashed back in, cold and unforgiving. "Sometimes," he said gently, "what we want isn't what's best for us. Goodbye, Madison." With that, he walked away, each step feeling like lead. He didn't allow himself to look back, knowing that if he did, his resolve might crumble. Back inside the ballroom, Mrs. Carrington found Madison standing alone, staring out at the city through tear-blurred eyes. "Oh, darling," she said, her tone a mixture of sympathy and satisfaction. "I know it hurts now, but you'll see. This is for the best. He's simply not our kind of people." Madison whirled on her mother, anger flashing in her eyes. "And what kind of people are we, Mother? The kind who judge others based on their bank account or the color of their skin? The kind who talk about making a difference while sipping champagne in our ivory towers?" Mrs. Carrington recoiled as if slapped. "Madison, how dare you speak to me like that? Everything we do is for the good of this family and our legacy." Madison laughed bitterly. "Our legacy? What legacy is that exactly? Because from where I'm standing, all I see is hypocrisy and fear." She brushed past her mother, heading for the stage. Mrs. Carrington called after her, "What do you think you're doing?" "What I should have done from the beginning," Madison replied, her voice steely with determination. "Telling the truth." As Madison took the microphone, a hush fell over the crowd. She looked out at the sea of expectant faces, her heart pounding. For a moment, she faltered, the weight of expectation threatening to crush her. But then she thought of Jamal, of his courage in facing a world so different from his own, and she found her voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger with each word. "I stand before you tonight, not as Madison Carrington, heiress to the Carrington fortune, but as a person who has had her eyes opened to the real world beyond these gilded walls." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Madison pressed on, her gaze sweeping the room. "We talk about community empowerment, about making a difference. But how can we truly understand the communities we claim to serve when we're so disconnected from their reality?" She paused, taking a deep breath. "Tonight, I had the privilege of bringing someone here who represents the very people we say we want to help. And do you know what happened? He was made to feel unwelcome, judged not by the content of his character, but by the assumptions we make based on appearance and background. Mrs. Carrington made a move towards the stage, but Madison's father held her back, his expression unreadable. "If we truly want to make a difference," Madison continued, her voice ringing out clear and strong, "we need to step out of our comfort zones. We need to listen to the voices we've been ignoring. We need to recognize that true change doesn't come from writing checks or attending galas. It comes from genuine understanding, from getting our hands dirty, from challenging our own preconceptions." She looked directly at her mother as she delivered her final words. "I, for one, am ready to do that. Who will join me?" For a long moment, silence reigned. Then, slowly, applause began to build. It started with a few scattered claps, then grew into a thunderous ovation. Madison stood there, trembling slightly, as the impact of what she'd done washed over her. As she stepped down from the stage, her father approached, his expression a mix of pride and concern. "That was quite a speech, sweetheart," he said softly. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Madison nodded, her chin lifted defiantly. "For the first time in my life, Dad, I think I do." But as the adrenaline of the moment faded, doubt began to creep in. She had taken a stand, yes, but at what cost? And was it too late to repair the damage with Jamal? As the party continued around her, Madison slipped out onto the terrace, pulling out her phone. Her finger hovered over Jamal's number, her heart racing. She knew that whatever happened next would change everything. The question was she ready for that change? The night of the Carrington Foundation's gala arrived, the air electric with anticipation. The grand ballroom was a sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, but Madison Carrington felt oddly disconnected from it all. Her emerald green dress, once a source of excitement, now felt like a costume, a remnant of a life she was no longer sure she wanted. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching for a face she knew wouldn't be there. Jamal's absence was like a physical ache, a constant reminder of the gulf between their worlds. She had tried calling him in the days following their argument, but her calls had gone straight to voicemail. Now, as she prepared to take the stage for her presentation, she felt adrift without his steadying presence. "Madison, darling," her mother's voice cut through her reverie. "It's time. Remember, stick to the script we discussed. This is not the time for improvisation." Madison nodded mechanically, her throat tight. As she ascended the stage, the spotlight blinding her momentarily, she felt a surge of panic. The carefully prepared speech in her hands suddenly seemed hollow, meaningless. She looked out at the expectant faces of Chicago's elite and felt a disconnect so profound it was almost dizzying. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice wavering slightly, "thank you all for coming tonight to support the Carrington Foundation's initiatives for..." She trailed off, the rehearsed words dying on her lips. In that moment, all she could think of was Jamal, his passion, his integrity, the way he had opened her eyes to a world beyond her privileged bubble. And suddenly, she knew she couldn't go through with this charade. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice stronger now. "I can't do this. I can't stand here and talk about community empowerment when the truth is, most of us in this room have no idea what that really means." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Madison saw her mother's face tighten with anger, but she pressed on. "We pat ourselves on the back for writing checks and attending galas, but how many of us have actually set foot in the communities we claim to support? How many of us have listened, really listened, to the people who live there?" The room was dead silent now, all eyes fixed on Madison. She took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. "I met someone recently who opened my eyes to the real challenges facing our city. Someone who showed me that true change doesn't come from grand gestures or lofty speeches, but from genuine understanding and hard work. She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. That person isn't here tonight, and that's our loss. Because his voice, the voice of the community we say we want to help, is exactly what we need to hear. With trembling hands, Madison set aside her prepared speech. I don't have any easy answers or quick solutions to offer you tonight. What I do have is a challenge. Step out of your comfort zone. Visit the neighborhoods we talk about revitalizing. Listen to the people who live there, and then, only then, can we start to make a real difference. As she stepped down from the stage, the room erupted into a mix of applause and confused murmuring. Madison barely heard it. Her feet carried her swiftly through the crowd and out into the cool night air. Once outside, she leaned against a pillar, her heart racing. What had she done? Years of carefully cultivated image, of meeting expectations. She had potentially thrown it all away in a matter of minutes. Madison? Her father's voice made her jump. She turned to see him standing there, his expression unreadable. That was quite a speech. She straightened, bracing herself for his disappointment. Dad, I'm sorry. I know I didn't stick to the script, but I couldn't. To her surprise, he held up a hand, silencing her. You reminded me of someone just now, he said softly. Someone I haven't thought about in a very long time. Madison frowned, confused. Who? A sad smile played at the corners of her father's mouth. Myself. A long time ago, before all this. He gestured vaguely at the opulent building behind them. What do you mean? Madison asked, her curiosity piqued. Her father sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. It's a long story, one I should have told you a long time ago. But right now, I think there's somewhere else you need to be, isn't there? Madison's heart skipped a beat. She thought of Jamal, of the hurt in his eyes the last time they'd spoken. Yes, she said softly. Yes, there is. Her father nodded, fishing his car keys out of his pocket. Take my car. Go. As Madison took the keys, her father squeezed her hand. And Madison, I'm proud of you. Tears pricked at her eyes as she hugged him fiercely. Then, gathering her courage, she set off into the night, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. The drive to Jamal's neighborhood seemed to take both an eternity and no time at all. As the sleek luxury car wound its way through increasingly unfamiliar streets, Madison felt a mixture of anticipation and fear. What if Jamal didn't want to see her? What if she was too late? Finally, she pulled up in front of his auto shop. The closed sign hung in the window, but a light was visible inside. Taking a deep breath, Madison stepped out of the car, her heels clicking on the cracked sidewalk. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What could she say that would make things right? How could she bridge the gap between their worlds? Before she could decide, the door swung open. Jamal stood there, his expression a mix of surprise and wariness. Madison, what are you doing here? Madison stood there, her carefully prepared words evaporating in the face of Jamal's questioning gaze. I couldn't go through with it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The gala, the speech, all of it. It felt wrong without you there. Jamal's expression softened slightly, but he didn't move from the doorway. Madison, we talked about this. Our worlds, they're just too different. Are they? Madison challenged, finding her voice. Or is that just what we've been told to believe? Jamal, you opened my eyes to a reality I'd been blind to my whole life. I can't just go back to the way things were before. Jamal sighed, running a hand over his face. And what about your family? Your life? Madison, I can't be the reason you throw all that away. You're not, Madison insisted. I'm making this choice for myself, because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm seeing things clearly. moment of silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and possibilities. Finally, Jamal stepped back, gesturing for Madison to come inside. The interior of the shop was a far cry from the opulent ballroom Madison had left behind. Tools lined the walls, and the air smelled of motor oil and metal. Yet somehow, it felt more real, more honest than the world she'd grown up in. "Nice dress," Jamal commented, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Bit overdressed for an auto shop, though." Madison laughed, the tension between them easing slightly. "Yeah, well, I didn't exactly plan this part of my evening." They settled onto a worn couch in the corner of the shop, the disparity between Madison's elegant gown and the grease-stained furniture, a visual representation of the worlds they were trying to bridge. "So," Jamal said, his tone serious, "what happens now? You've made your grand gesture, walked away from your family's expectations. But what does that mean in the real world?" Madison took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't have all the answers. But I know I want to make a real difference, not just talk about it at fancy parties. And I know I can't do that without understanding the communities we claim to want to help." She reached out, tentatively taking Jamal's hand. "I want to learn, Jamal. Really learn. About your world, about the challenges you face every day. And I want to use my resources, my connections, to make actual change. But I need your help." Jamal studied her face, searching for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, he squeezed her hand gently. "It won't be easy," he warned. "You'll face resistance, not just from your world, but from mine too. People might not trust your intentions." Madison nodded, a determined glint in her eye. "I know, but I'm ready for that. I'm ready to put in the work, to earn that trust." A slow smile spread across Jamal's face. "Well," he said, "I guess we've got our work cut out for us then." As they sat there, planning and dreaming in the quiet of the auto shop, Madison felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, full of obstacles and setbacks. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The night wore on, their conversation flowing easily as they discussed ideas for community programs, ways to leverage Madison's connections for real change, and strategies for bridging the gap between their two worlds. As the first light of dawn began to creep through the shop windows, they realized they had talked through the entire night. "I should probably get going," Madison said reluctantly, though she made no move to leave. "My family will be wondering where I am." Jamal nodded, but there was a new warmth in his eyes. "This isn't going to be easy, you know," he said softly. "We're from different worlds. There will be people on both sides who won't understand." Madison met his gaze steadily. "I know, but I think it's worth fighting for. Don't you?" Instead of answering, Jamal leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss. It was a promise, a beginning, and a challenge all rolled into one. As Madison finally left the shop, the sun rising over the city, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. She knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and misunderstandings, but she also knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that it was a journey worth taking. The contrast between the gleaming luxury car she'd arrived in and the modest surroundings of Jamal's neighborhood was stark, a visual reminder of the barriers they would have to overcome. But as Madison drove away, stealing one last glance at Jamal standing in the doorway of his shop, she felt a surge of determination. They had taken the first step. Now, the real work would begin. In the weeks that followed, Madison and Jamal threw themselves into their mission with a fervor that surprised even them. The glittering world of galas and charity balls seemed a distant memory as Madison immersed herself in the realities of Jamal's community. Their first project was small, but significant. A video series showcasing the real stories of the neighborhood. Madison's marketing expertise combined with Jamal's deep community connections to create something authentic and powerful. "We need to show the human side of these issues," Madison explained as they set up for their first interview. "Not just statistics, but real people with real stories." Jamal nodded, adjusting the camera. "And we need to let people speak for themselves. No voiceovers, no editorializing, just the raw truth." Their first subject was Mrs. Johnson, an elderly resident who had lived in the neighborhood for over 5 decades. As she spoke about the changes she'd seen, the challenges facing her community, and her hopes for the future, Madison felt a lump form in her throat. This was the reality she'd been insulated from for so long. As they wrapped up the interview, Mrs. Johnson took Madison's hand. "It's good to see young people like you taking an interest," she said warmly. "We need more bridges between communities, not walls." The words stayed with Madison long after they left Mrs. Johnson's home. "Bridges, not walls," she murmured thoughtfully. Jamal glanced at her. "That could be our tagline," he suggested. "For the whole project." Madison's eyes lit up. "Yes, and we could use it as a theme for the next foundation event. Instead of another stuffy gala, we could host a community fair. Bring people from different neighborhoods together, showcase local businesses and artists." As they brainstormed, their excitement grew. This was more than just a video series or a single event. It was the beginning of a movement. Over the next few weeks, they threw themselves into the preparations. Madison leveraged her connections to secure funding and support, while Jamal worked tirelessly to ensure community buy-in and participation. It wasn't always smooth sailing. Madison faced skepticism from some community members who doubted her intentions, while Jamal had to navigate the complex politics of various neighborhood groups. There were moments of frustration, of doubt, of wondering if they were in over their heads. But there were also moments of pure joy and connection. Like the afternoon they spent helping a group of local kids paint a mural, or the evening they organized a potluck dinner that brought together people from all walks of life. As the day of the community fair approached, Madison found herself working late into the night at Jamal's shop, surrounded by planning documents and to-do lists. Jamal walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You know," he said, handing her a cup, "a few months ago I never would have believed I'd see Madison Carrington pulling an all-nighter in an auto shop." Madison laughed, gratefully accepting the coffee. "A few months ago I never would have believed it either, but now I can't imagine being anywhere else." Jamal's expression softened as he looked at her. "You've really thrown yourself into this. It's incredible to see." Madison set down her coffee, meeting his gaze. "It feels right, Jamal. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that really matters." The air between them crackled with unspoken emotion. Slowly, Jamal leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and passionate. When they finally pulled apart, both were a little breathless. "We should, probably get back to work," Jamal said, though he made no move to step away. Madison nodded, a smile playing at her lips. "Probably. We've got a community to bring together after all." As they turned back to their planning, Madison felt a sense of purpose and belonging she'd never experienced before. The road ahead would be challenging, she knew. There would be obstacles, setbacks, moments of doubt. But with Jamal by her side and the support of the community they were fighting for, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. The community fair was no longer just an event. It was a statement, a beginning, a promise of change. And as Madison looked at Jamal, his face illuminated by the glow of the computer screen as he worked on the final details, she knew that this was just the start of their journey together. The day of the community fair dawned bright and clear, the air buzzing with anticipation. Madison arrived at the park early, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nerves. The once pristine grass was now dotted with colorful tents and booths, each representing a different aspect of the community they were working to unite. Jamal was already there, directing a group of volunteers as they set up the main stage. He caught sight of Madison and waved her over, a broad smile lighting up his face. "Ready for the big day?" he asked, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. Madison took a deep breath, looking around at the bustling activity. "As ready as I'll ever be. I just hope it all comes together the way we planned." As the morning progressed, people began to trickle in. At first, it was just a few curious onlookers, but soon the park was filled with a diverse crowd. Children laughed as they played games at the carnival booths, while adults browsed local artwork and sampled food from neighborhood restaurants. Madison found herself constantly on the move, addressing last-minute issues and ensuring everything ran smoothly. She was in the middle of helping a local artist set up her display when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Well, I must say, this is quite different from our usual galas." Madison turned to see her mother standing there, looking somewhat out of place in her designer outfit. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Mrs. Carrington's expression was a mix of curiosity and discomfort. "Your father suggested we should see what you've been working so hard on. I have to admit, I was skeptical." Before Madison could respond, Jamal approached, his expression guarded. "Mrs. Carrington," he said politely, "welcome to our community fair." An awkward silence fell between them, the gulf between their worlds suddenly stark and apparent. Madison felt her heart sink. Had it been a mistake to think they could bridge this divide? But then, unexpectedly, Mrs. Carrington spoke. "Mr. Williams," she said, her voice softer than Madison had ever heard it, "I owe you an apology. My behavior at the gala was unacceptable. I made judgments without taking the time to understand." Jamal's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he nodded graciously. "Thank you, Mrs. Carrington. I appreciate that." Mrs. Carrington turned to Madison, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "And Madison, I'm proud of you. This," she gestured around at the fair, "is truly remarkable." Madison felt a lump form in her throat. She reached out, taking both her mother's and Jamal's hands. "Thank you, Mom. That means more than you know." The moment was interrupted by the sound of feedback from the main stage. "I think that's your cue," Jamal said, giving Madison's hand a squeeze. As Madison made her way to the stage, she felt a surge of confidence. Looking out at the diverse crowd, community members, local business owners, even a few familiar faces from her old world, she knew that this was where she was meant to be. "Welcome, everyone," she began, her voice strong and clear. "Today is about more than just a fair. It's about building bridges between communities, about recognizing that despite our differences, we all share the same hopes and dreams for our city." As she spoke, she saw Jamal in the crowd, beaming with pride. Her parents stood nearby, her mother's arm linked with her father's, both listening intently. "This is just the beginning," Madison continued. "Together, we can create real, lasting change, not through grand gestures or lofty speeches, but through understanding, compassion, and hard work. Today, we take the first step on that journey together." The crowd erupted into applause as Madison finished her speech. As she stepped down from the stage, she was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and community members eager to share their ideas and support. In the midst of the crowd, she felt a hand on her arm. She turned to see an older man in a crisp suit, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Carrington," he said, "I'm Richard Thornton, CEO of Midwest Development Corp. I must say, I'm impressed with what you've accomplished here." Madison's heart skipped a beat. Midwest Development was one of the largest real estate companies in Chicago, known for its urban renewal projects. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," she said cautiously. I'd like to discuss the possibility of partnering with your initiative, he continued. We've been looking for ways to make our development projects more community-focused. I think we could learn a lot from your approach. Madison's mind raced with the possibilities. A partnership with Midwest Development could provide the resources to expand their work across the city, but it also came with risks. She glanced over at Jamal, who had been listening to the conversation with a guarded expression. That's a very interesting proposition, Mr. Thornton, Madison said carefully. Why don't we set up a meeting next week to discuss it further? I'd like to involve some of our community partners in the conversation. Thornton nodded, looking pleased. Of course, I look forward to it. As he walked away, Jamal approached. Midwest Development, huh? He said, his tone neutral. That could be a game changer. Madison nodded, her expression serious. It could be, but we'd need to be careful. Make sure any partnership truly benefits the community, not just the developers. Jamal's face broke into a proud smile. Look at you, talking like a true community advocate. You've come a long way, Madison Carrington. Madison laughed, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. We've come a long way, she corrected him. Together. As the fair continued around them, Madison felt a sense of hope and possibility she'd never experienced before. They had taken a crucial first step today, but the journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, navigating potential partnerships, continuing to bridge divides, fighting for real, lasting change. But looking at Jamal, at the vibrant community around them, at her parents who were tentatively engaging with local residents, Madison knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And that made all the difference. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the community fair, Madison and Jamal found a quiet moment amidst the dwindling crowd. They sat on a bench, watching as volunteers began the cleanup process, the day's events still buzzing in the air around them. We did it, Madison said softly, a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration in her voice. I can hardly believe it. Jamal nodded, a proud smile on his face. Yeah, we did. But this is just the beginning, you know. Madison turned to him, her expression serious. I know, and I'm ready for whatever comes next. But Jamal, there's something we need to talk about. Jamal's smile faltered slightly. What is it? Madison took a deep breath. This thing between us, it's not just about the work we're doing, is it? At least not for me. A moment of tension hung between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Then Jamal's face softened, and he reached out to take Madison's hand. No, he said quietly. It's not just about the work for me either. Relief washed over Madison, but it was quickly followed by a new wave of anxiety. But Jamal, our worlds are still so different. My family, your community, there are still so many barriers. Jamal squeezed her hand gently. Maybe those barriers are exactly why we need to do this. To show that it's possible to bridge those gaps, not just in our work, but in our personal lives too. Madison leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. It won't be easy, she murmured. Nothing worth doing ever is, Jamal replied, his voice warm with affection. As they sat there, the last rays of sunlight fading from the sky, Madison felt a mixture of hope and trepidation about the future. They had taken a huge step today, both in their community work and in their personal relationship. But she knew that the real challenges were still to come. The next morning, Madison woke early, her mind already racing with plans and ideas. She had a meeting scheduled with her father to discuss the future of the Carrington Foundation, and she was determined to push for real change. As she entered her father's study, she was surprised to see her mother there as well, both of them looking uncharacteristically serious. Madison, her father began, his voice grave. We need to talk about your recent activities. Madison felt her defenses rise. If this is about the community fair, I thought you both supported. It's not just about the fair, her mother interrupted. It's about your whole involvement with that neighborhood, with Mr. Williams. Madison's heart sank. She had hoped that her parents' attendance at the fair signaled a change in their attitude. But clearly, old prejudices died hard. "Mom, Dad," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "What Jamal and I are doing is important. We're making real change, bridging gaps that have existed for far too long." Her father held up a hand. "We're not denying the importance of your work, Madison, but we're concerned about the company you're keeping, the way you're representing the Carrington name." Madison felt a flash of anger. "The Carrington name? Is that all you care about? What about doing what's right?" A tense silence fell over the room. Then, to Madison's surprise, her mother spoke up. "Madison, there's something you need to know. Something we should have told you a long time ago." Madison looked between her parents, confusion replacing her anger. "What are you talking about?" Her mother took a deep breath, exchanging a glance with her father before continuing. "Our family. We didn't always have this wealth, this status. Your grandfather, he came from a neighborhood not unlike the one you're working in now." Madison felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "What? But you always said—" "We lied," her father said bluntly. "We were so focused on maintaining our position, on giving you every advantage, that we forgot where we came from." Madison sank into a chair, her mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this now?" Her mother's eyes were filled with a mixture of shame and pride. "Because watching you at that fair yesterday, it reminded us of who we used to be, of the values we lost sight of along the way. We're not saying it will be easy," her father added. "There will still be people in our circle who won't understand, who will resist the kind of change you're trying to make. But we want you to know that we support you. Fully." Tears pricked at Madison's eyes as the weight of her parents' words sank in. This changed everything, not just for her relationship with Jamal, but for the entire focus of their work. "Thank you," she said softly, looking at her parents with new eyes. This means more than you know." As she left her parents' house, Madison's mind was whirling with possibilities. She needed to tell Jamal, to reshape their plans with this new information. Their work wasn't just about bridging two different worlds anymore. It was about reclaiming a forgotten history, about returning to roots long buried under wealth and status. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying over the keys as she texted Jamal. "Meet me at the shop. We need to talk. Everything's changed." As she drove towards Jamal's neighborhood, Madison felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever before. The road ahead would still be challenging, full of obstacles and resistance. But now, armed with the truth of her family's history and the support of her parents, she felt ready to face whatever came their way. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The bridges they were building were more important than ever, and Madison was determined to see their vision through, no matter what it took. The bell above the door of Jamal's auto shop jingled as Madison burst in, her eyes alight with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. Jamal looked up from the engine he was working on, concern etching his features at her urgent entrance. "Madison, what's going on?" "Your text sounded serious," he said, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached her. Madison took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "Jamal, you're not going to believe this. I just had a talk with my parents and, well, it changes everything." Over the next hour, Madison recounted her conversation with her parents, watching as Jamal's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief to thoughtful consideration. "So your family," he said slowly, "they came from a neighborhood like this?" Madison nodded, still processing the information herself. "Apparently my grandfather worked his way up from nothing. But somewhere along the way, they decided to bury that history, to pretend it never happened. Jamal leaned back against his workbench, his brow furrowed in thought. Well, it's not uncommon, you know. People want to forget where they came from, especially if it was a struggle. But don't you see, Madison said, her voice rising with excitement. This changes everything about our work. It's not just about bridging two different worlds anymore. It's about reconnecting with forgotten roots, about showing that success doesn't have to mean turning your back on your community. Jamal nodded slowly, a smile beginning to spread across his face. You're right. This could be powerful. But Madison, he added, his expression growing serious, are you sure you're ready for what this means? Going public with this information, it could change things for your family, for you. Madison reached out, taking Jamal's hand in hers. I'm sure, for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, doing exactly what I'm meant to do, and I want to do it with you. The intensity of the moment hung between them, charged with possibility and the weight of the decision they were making. Then, slowly, Jamal pulled Madison closer, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that felt like a promise, a beginning. When they finally pulled apart, both were a little breathless. All right, Jamal said, his voice husky. Let's do this. But we need to be smart about it, strategic. They spent the rest of the day planning, their excitement growing with each new idea. They would start by incorporating Madison's family history into their next community project, using it as a way to inspire others and challenge preconceptions about success and social mobility. As evening fell, they decided to take a walk through the neighborhood, wanting to see it through this new lens of shared history. The streets were alive with the sounds of families returning home from work, children playing, the everyday rhythms of community life. You know, Madison said as they passed a group of teenagers shooting hoops in a driveway, I keep thinking about what my life might have been like if my family hadn't left a neighborhood like this, if they hadn't decided to hide their past. Jamal squeezed her hand. You can't change the past, Madison, but you're here now, and you're making a difference. They rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with a group of local community leaders who had been instrumental in helping with their projects. The men's expressions hardened as they saw Madison, their gazes flickering between her and Jamal with obvious disapproval. Jamal, one of the men, Mr. Thompson, said gruffly, Can we have a word, in private? Jamal hesitated, looking at Madison. She nodded, understanding. Go ahead, I'll wait here. As Jamal stepped away with the men, Madison could hear their heated whispers. What are you doing, man? She's not one of us. She can't understand our struggles, our life. You don't know her, Jamal defended. She's committed to this community, to making real change. And when the novelty wears off, when she realizes how hard this life really is, another man challenged, she'll go running back to her mansion. And where will that leave us? Where will that leave you? Madison felt her heart sink. Despite all their progress, there were still so many barriers to overcome, so much mistrust to navigate. She was about to turn away, to give them privacy, when she heard Jamal's voice rise. You're wrong about her, he said firmly. And you're wrong about what we're trying to do here. This isn't about her joining our world or me joining hers. It's about creating something new, something better, together. As Jamal walked back to her, his jaw set with determination, Madison felt a surge of pride and affection. You okay? She asked softly. Jamal nodded, taking her hand. Yeah, it's not going to be easy, you know. There will be resistance from both sides. Madison squeezed his hand. I know, but we're in this together, right? Together, Jamal agreed, a smile breaking through his serious expression. As they continued their walk, the challenges ahead felt daunting, but not insurmountable. They had truth on their side now, and a shared vision of a future where bridges replaced barriers, where communities could come together without losing their unique identities. The sun was setting as they made their way back to Jamal's shop, casting long shadows across the street. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to put their plans into action. But for now, in this moment, they were exactly where they needed to be, side by side, ready to face whatever came next, together. The day of reckoning had arrived. Madison stood before the mirror in her childhood bedroom, smoothing down the simple yet elegant dress she had chosen for the occasion. Tonight's charity gala wasn't just another social event. It was the moment when she and Jamal would reveal the truth about her family's history and launch their new initiative. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning to see her mother enter the room. Mrs. Carrington's eyes were misty as she took in her daughter's appearance. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," she said softly, "and so grown up." Madison smiled, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. "Thanks, Mom. Are you sure you're okay with this? With what we're about to do?" Her mother took a deep breath, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from Madison's dress. "I won't lie and say I'm not nervous. This will change everything, for our family, for our social standing. But," she added, meeting Madison's gaze steadily, "it's the right thing to do. Your father and we lost sight of that for a long time. But you've reminded us of who we used to be, of the values we once held dear." Tears pricked at Madison's eyes as she hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for supporting me, for being brave enough to face the truth." As they pulled apart, Mrs. Carrington wiped at her eyes, chuckling softly. "Well, we'd better get going. Can't keep your young man waiting, can we?" Madison felt a flutter in her stomach at the mention of Jamal. He would be meeting them at the venue, the first time he'd be openly attending a Carrington event as Madison's partner. The drive to the gala venue was tense with anticipation. As they pulled up to the red carpet, cameras flashing, Madison took a deep breath. "Here we go," she murmured. Her father squeezed her hand. "We're right behind you, sweetheart, all the way." As they made their way into the opulent ballroom, Madison scanned the crowd for Jamal. She spotted him near the bar, looking handsome but slightly uncomfortable in his tuxedo. Their eyes met across the room, and the world seemed to fall away as she made her way to him. "You made it," she said softly, reaching for his hand. Jamal nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." As they mingled with the guests, Madison could feel the curious glances, hear the whispered conversations. The sight of Jamal by her side was causing quite a stir among Chicago's elite. Finally, it was time. Madison took the stage, her heart pounding, but her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. Before we begin the usual proceedings, there's something important I need to share with you all." A hush fell over the room as Madison recounted her family's true history, her grandfather's humble beginnings, the struggles he faced, and the decision to hide that past once success was achieved. "For too long, we've perpetuated the myth that success means leaving your roots behind," Madison continued, her voice growing stronger. "We've created artificial barriers between communities, between people. Tonight, we're here to change that narrative." She gestured for Jamal to join her on stage. As he took her hand, she saw a mixture of pride and nervousness in his eyes. "This is Jamal Williams," Madison introduced him. "He's my partner, both in life and in our new initiative. Together, we're launching a program to bridge the gap between communities, to create opportunities for dialogue, understanding, and real, lasting change." As they outlined their plans, mentorship programs, community investment initiatives, educational opportunities. Madison could see the room's reaction shifting. Some faces showed skepticism, others interest, and a few showed real enthusiasm. When they finished speaking, there was a moment of silence. Then slowly, applause began to build. It wasn't universal, but it was genuine. As they stepped down from the stage, they were immediately surrounded by people, some offering congratulations, others wanting to know more about their plans, and a few expressing their disapproval. In the midst of the crowd, Madison's parents approached. Her father's eyes were shining with unshed tears as he hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered. "Both of you," he added, shaking Jamal's hand firmly. As the evening wore on, Madison and Jamal found a quiet moment alone on a balcony overlooking the city. "We did it," Madison said softly, leaning into Jamal's embrace. "We did," Jamal agreed. "But this is just the beginning. There's still so much work to do." Madison nodded, her expression determined. "I know. But for the first time, I feel like we're on the right path. Like we're making a real difference." Jamal turned to face her, his expression serious. "Madison, I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer." Madison's heart skipped a beat. "What is it? Are you sure about this? About us? Because once we really start this work, once we're out there in the public eye together, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same." Madison didn't hesitate. She reached up, cupping Jamal's face in her hands. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. My life has already changed, Jamal. For the better. Because of you. Because of this work we're doing together." Jamal's face broke into a wide smile. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "In that case," he said softly, "Madison Carrington, will you marry me? Will you be my partner in every sense of the word? In life, in love, and in our mission to make this world a little bit better?" Tears sprang to Madison's eyes as she looked at the simple yet beautiful ring nestled in the box. It wasn't the large, ostentatious diamond she might have once expected. Instead, it was a delicate band with a small, ethically sourced stone, a perfect representation of their shared values and the new life they were building together. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Jamal. 1,000 times yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, their lips met in a kiss that felt like a promise, a beginning, and a revolution all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were laughing and crying, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. "We should probably get back inside," Madison said after a while, though she made no move to leave the comfort of Jamal's arms. "People will be wondering where we've gone." Jamal nodded, but his expression turned serious. "Before we do, there's something else we need to discuss, something I overheard earlier that you need to know about." Madison's heart sank. "What is it?" "I heard some of the board members talking," Jamal said carefully. "They're not happy about the direction you're taking the foundation. There's talk of trying to force you out, of appointing someone who will maintain the status quo." Madison felt a flash of anger, quickly followed by determination. "Let them try," she said firmly. "This foundation was built on my grandfather's hard work and vision. I won't let them twist it into something he wouldn't recognize." Jamal squeezed her hand. "I'm with you, every step of the way, but it's not going to be easy. We're challenging a lot of powerful people, shaking up a system they've benefited from for generations." Madison nodded, her mind already racing with plans and strategies. "We knew this wouldn't be a smooth road. But we're doing the right thing, Jamal, and we're not alone. My parents are behind us, and I bet there are others who will stand with us once they understand what we're trying to do." As they made their way back into the ballroom, hand in hand, Madison felt a surge of strength and purpose. The sight of her engagement ring caught the light, a constant reminder of the commitment they had just made, not just to each other, but to their shared vision of a more equitable, connected community. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, pointed questions, and intense discussions. Madison and Jamal moved through the crowd as a unit, their united front clear to all who saw them. By the time the last guests were leaving, both were exhausted but exhilarated. "Ready to face the world, Mrs. Soon-to-be Williams?" Jamal asked as they stepped out into the cool night air. Madison grinned, the name sending a thrill through her. "More than ready, Mr. Soon-to-be Carrington Williams," she countered, loving the way his eyes lit up at the suggestion of taking her name alongside his. As they drove away from the glittering lights of the gala, Madison leaned her head on Jamal's shoulder, her mind already turning to the challenges that lay ahead. There would be resistance, both from her world and his. There would be setbacks and disappointments. But there would also be triumphs, moments of connection and understanding that would make it all worthwhile. The city stretched out before them, a landscape of possibilities and potential. In that moment, Madison knew with absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. "You know," she said softly, "my grandfather used to say that true wealth isn't about money or status. It's about the lives you touch, the differences you make." Jamal nodded, his eyes on the road ahead. "Sounds like a wise man. I wish I could have met him." Madison smiled, squeezing Jamal's hand. "In a way you have, through this work we're doing, through the legacy we're reclaiming and rebuilding. I think he'd be proud of us." As they pulled up in front of Jamal's modest apartment building, soon to be their shared home, Madison felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey ahead would be challenging, but with Jamal by her side, she was ready to face whatever came their way. They were building bridges, not just between communities, but between past and present, between what was and what could be. And in doing so, they were creating a future that honored the best of both their worlds. A future of understanding, opportunity, and love. As they climbed the stairs to the apartment, hand in hand, Madison knew that this was just the beginning of their story. There would be more challenges to face, more barriers to break down, more lives to touch. But together, they were ready for it all. The door closed behind them, shutting out the world for a moment. In the quiet of their shared space, Madison and Jamal held each other close, savoring the peace before the storm of change they were about to unleash. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new opportunities, new chances to make a difference. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. And that was everything. But caring isn't always enough. We need voices like yours, Jamal. People who understand the real challenges facing our communities. Jamal studied her face in the moonlight. "Why me, though? I'm just a mechanic." Madison's hand found his, squeezing gently. "You're not just anything, Jamal. You're passionate, you're knowledgeable, and you have a vision for your community. That's exactly what we need." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away.